freedom is never the end of the story. It is only the beginning. After the battles were fought, after the swamps fell quiet, after the Black Seminoles carved out a space where they could breathe without chains, something new began. And what came next was not just survival. It was nation building. The Seminoles and their African allies, many now free for the first time in their lives, began to build entire communities together. They planted corn and beans in Florida's sandy soil. They built chickees, open-sided thatched houses that let the air flow through. They held dances and told stories late into the night, passing on the memory of both their ancestors, African kings and queens, Creek warriors, mothers who had carried whole families through the woods to freedom. But the story was far from simple. The United States government had not forgotten them. Even after the Second Seminole War, soldiers hunted down Black Seminoles who had fought too fiercely to be ignored. Many were forced west to Indian Territory, what we now call Oklahoma. There, everything became more complicated. The tribes were under enormous pressure to assimilate to European American ways. They were told to farm like white men, to dress like white men, even to enslave like white men, and some did. Historian Elena Roberts writes, "This is the part of the story we don't like to talk about." In Indian Territory, some native leaders began adopting the system of African slavery themselves. For some Black Seminoles, freedom turned into something much closer to servitude again. Families that had lived as equals in Florida now found themselves living under new hierarchies, sometimes even forced to pay tribute or give a share of their harvest to Seminole chiefs. Yet they resisted. They built their own independent villages, often a few miles away from the main Seminole towns. They married among themselves and kept their distinct identity alive, passing on both African and native traditions. And sometimes they fought back. During the Civil War, many Black Seminoles sided with the Union, believing that a Northern victory might finally bring them full freedom. Others were caught in the middle as the Seminole Nation split in two, one side siding with the Confederacy, the other with the Union. It was chaos, and it left scars that lasted for generations. But the Black Seminoles were nothing if not resourceful. In the late 19th century, when the U.S. military needed scouts to track Apache warriors in the deserts of Texas, they turned to the very people they had once tried to capture. Kevin Mulroy, author of Freedom on the Border, calls them some of the finest scouts the Army ever employed, men who could read the ground like a book and vanish into the brush like smoke. These scouts, men like John Horse and Pompey Factor, became legends on the frontier. They wore U.S. Army uniforms but kept their unique identity, singing African chants and speaking the Afro-Seminole Creole language, a blend of Gola and Miccosukee. And then, once again, they were asked to move. After the frontier wars ended, many Black Seminoles were no longer welcome in Texas. White settlers feared their land claims. So they crossed back into Mexico, to Nacimiento, a small community where their descendants still live today. If you go there, you might still hear the language they speak, an endangered tongue unlike any other on Earth. You might see their faces bearing the history of two continents, but their struggle didn't end with the 19th century. In the 20th century, the question of identity, of who counts as Seminole, became a political battleground. In Oklahoma, where the U.S. government had forced many Seminoles, tribal membership rolls were created, and Black Seminoles were often left off them. This wasn't just a question of pride. It meant being excluded from land allotments, from political representation, from money awarded in federal settlements. Dr. Kevin Mulroy explains, "For over a century, the descendants of Black Seminoles have had to fight for recognition, to prove that their story is not a footnote but an essential part of Seminole history. Even today, some descendants are still fighting court battles to be recognized as full members of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, but their culture persists. In Texas and Oklahoma and Mexico and Florida, you can still find Black Seminoles gathering for annual reunions, cooking traditional foods like sofkey and black-eyed peas and singing the same call-and-response songs that once rang out in the swamps of Florida. Their story is one of cycles, of freedom found, freedom lost, freedom reclaimed again. It's a reminder that history doesn't move in a straight line. It loops and twists, like a river winding through a swamp. And through it all, the people who call themselves Black Seminoles have endured. Maybe that's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about escape. It's not just about war. It's about building and rebuilding identity over and over in the face of a country that tried to erase it. A descendant once told historian Rosalind Howard, "We are still here. And as long as we gather, as long as we speak our language, as long as we tell our children who we are, we will never be lost. The past is never really past." Walk through Oklahoma or Texas or Florida, or cross the border into Nacimiento, and you can still feel it. The weight of memory, the echoes of drums, the voices of two peoples who became one. And maybe, just maybe, it will make you wonder what other hidden nations are still living all around us. Because history is not just what happened, it's what survives. And this story survives.